Walksnail have released 2 new cameras and upgraded VTX modules for the AvatarHD system. If you don't know what AvatarHD is, it's a digital FPV system like the DJI FPV system and HD0. The difference between the HD0, Avatar and DJI is that Avatar is a two-way system like DJI, but it isn't limited to working with only DJI goggles. For instance, AvatarHD works with their own Avatar goggles, the Fat Shark Dominator goggle, the Fat Shark Recon goggle, and the system even has a new VRX module that allows you to use it on any goggle with a HDMI input, including the new HD0 goggles. Now, since its release, Walksnail have been upgrading the system. There's been lots of firmware updates, and we've even seen the new 1S VTX as well. But today, they've now done some new upgrades on the cameras and the original main VTX module. What we're going to do in this video is walk you through what these upgrades are, talk you through the features and capabilities, take them for a fly, and then at the very end, share with you my thoughts. Now, just to be clear up front, Walksnail / CaddX did send me these new VTXs and cameras for free. However, they have not seen this video before it's been published, and as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Anyway, let's get on with it and let's take a look at what's changed. Okay, now just to explain exactly what has been released, there are 3 new versions of the AvatarHD VTX kit. There is an AvatarHD standard kit version 2, and there are going to be 2 versions of this, and then there is a new AvatarHD Pro kit. Now, all 3 of these kits come with a new version 2 of the VTX, which we'll take a closer look at in a minute, but there is actually a difference between the VTX that comes in the standard kit and the VTX that comes in the Pro kit, in the sense of the VTX in the 2 standard kits is the 8GB model, and the version that comes in the Pro kit is a new upgraded 32GB model, allowing you to have more storage on board for recording. As I've mentioned, there are 2 versions of the standard kit. Both come with the new Mico version 2 camera, which has a 2K pixel sensor, 4:3 native aspect ratio, and the 2 versions are: one comes with a gyro sensor on board and one comes without. We then have the Pro kit, which I said already comes with that new 32GB version 2 VTX. This comes with a new Pro camera, which has a 1/1.8-inch Sony Starvis sensor, which supports amazing low light footage. It has a built-in gyro sensor and actually is one of the only cameras to support full up to 120 frames a second with low light capabilities. But again, that will be limited to 100 frames a second when using the Avatar system. The basics are, you have 2 standard VTX kits, one with the gyro and one without, and then you have the Pro kit, which has the better sensor, low light, and 32GB worth of storage. Now, you might be wondering, why have they put a gyro sensor on board? Well, the reason for that is the AvatarHD system now supports recording of gyro data, allowing you to stabilize your footage in gyro flow. The real nice thing about this is that it is tied to the camera and not the VTX, and you can actually install these new cameras on the original Avatar VTX and get that new capability as well. You don't have to upgrade your VTX to get that capability. Whilst there is a new version 2 with improvements, you actually can have these improvements as well with regards to the gyro flow simply by upgrading your camera. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at the new VTX and the new micro camera version 2 kit. Now, it comes pretty much the same way that the AvatarHD kit always has. You get the leaflet in the box showing you how to set it up, and then you get the VTX in this foam packaging. Now, included with this kit, you will find that we get the camera, the VTX, the antenna, as well as the firmware update cable. You may notice that there is only one antenna in this kit, and the reason for that is the new version 2 VTX only actually has one antenna port. They've done away with the dual antennas like we had on the original VTX, and now it's just got a single antenna port located over here, UFL located under this plate. We then also, as I've mentioned, have our firmware update cable, which has a new smaller connector on compared to the original one. Again, we'll take a look at that in a minute. We then have our cables, and then we have our antenna, just like we had before with the UFL connector down there. Now, taking a closer look at the new version 2 VTX first of all, externally, the 8GB and the 32GB is identical, so there's no difference what you're looking at between the two on the outside. It's worth mentioning it is pretty much identical in size and shape, but there are some big changes here. For instance, the VTX now has a 20x20 and 25x25 mounting pattern. As I've said, there's the 8GB model and a 32GB model available as well. It has an overall improved internal and external design. The heatsink now actually covers the whole PCB around the side, whereas before you can see that the board was very visible around the edges and areas around here, whereas now the board is fully encapsulated in the heatsink, helping with the damage resistance of the board in use. There is also now new dual inputs. There is a connector for the power and the UART, but they have also now added solder pads as well, allowing you to solder directly to the board. So if you were to rip the connector off, you can solder direct, or if you want to, solder direct and not worry about the connection at all. As I mentioned earlier, they've done away with the dual antenna ports like we had on the original VTX, and there's now a single UFL held under this plate here. The bind button is also protected now as well, so that is located inside the shielding here on the VTX. You can see that they've put the writing on the edge of the VTX metal housing as well, showing you where the pinout is and the connections. And then on the other side, the firmware update port, or the port for actually connecting to USB, is again located on the inside of the board, but set back, ensuring that it's well protected. Just confirming the specifications. Power-wise, still 6 to 25.2 volt or 2 to 6S. As I've said, it's available in two versions, 8GB and 32. Resolution, recording-wise, it will support 1080p 60, 720p 100 or 60 frames a second on the onboard DVR. It has a maximum power output of 30 dBm. It supports a frequency range of 5.725 gigs to 5.850, just like the last unit. And overall, it's the same overall spec as the other unit. Still supports canvas mode, still supports Betaflight, iNav, KISS, FetTech, ArdriPilot, all of the usual stuff, including the latency is low as 25 milliseconds. It's just that it's an upgraded design, but the main specifications have not changed. Now, taking a look at the two new cameras, on the left we have the new Pro camera. This is the one with the Sony Starvis sensor, the 1/1.8 inch. It's got the built-in gyro sensor, and it's going to offer that lovely low light footage. And then we've got the new Micro V2 on the right here. This is an upgraded version of that original micro camera, 2K pixel sensor, 4:3 native resolution, and again available with and without the gyro sensor. Now, both of these cameras are 19x19. You can see if I put them next to each other, there is a bit of a difference in sizing, especially on the Starvis one, a much bigger, longer lens overall. Now, I don't actually have the lens spec for these two cameras at the moment. Externally, they're both 19x19 cameras. If we flip them on the side, you can see we've got the two screw holes there for mounting. On the back, you've got that same cable out the back setup on the micro, and then on the other one we've got the cable coming out the bottom, more like we've seen on the other cameras. It's nice to see them continue to develop the cameras that are available on this system, and as I have mentioned already, these cameras are both fully compatible with the original VTXs, so the cameras themselves have that gyro sensor built in, and if you wanted to upgrade your existing VTX to have these cameras, you can, and hopefully they will be available very soon. Now this is me from the future. I finally now have the full specifications for both of these cameras. Starting with the Micro version 2. This camera supports resolutions of 1080p 120, 1080p 100 and 1080p 60 frames a second. It also supports the usual 720p, 100, 120 and 60 as well. It is worth mentioning though, whilst they do list a 120 frames a second specification on these, the Avatar system itself, so the VTX and the whole system is still using 100 frames a second. It's just the camera is capable up to 120. They have advertised this in the past, but nothing has changed on the actual system itself. That isn't to say we wouldn't have a 120 frames a second mode in the future, but here and now, everything is the same as it always was. The camera itself has a native 4x3 sensor, but it does support a 16x9 mode as well. The lens is a 2.1mm lens with an f2.0 aperture. The sensor is a rolling shutter sensor and the camera itself weighs about 7.2 grams. As I've mentioned, this one is available in two versions, with and without the gyro on board, and its size is 19x19x22 and it weighs roughly 7.2 grams in total. Moving over to the Pro camera, or what's officially going to be the Polar Pro for the Avatar system, this has that 1/1.8-inch Sony Starvis sensor, which gives it that low light capability, and that will work down to a minimum lux of 0.0001. It has a resolution of 1080p 60, 720p 120, 100 or 60 frames a second. The big difference between these two is this one supports that 1080p 100, 120. This one only supports those higher frame rates in the 720p mode. It has a 160-degree field of view f1.6 aperture lens and weighs 9.5 grams and has a size of 19x19x24, and as you can see, it is a bit larger than the Micro version. Just comparing the weight, the original VTX with the antennas was coming in somewhere in the region of 20 grams, and this new VTX with the antenna is coming in a little bit more, about a gram more, and that's as a result of that additional metalwork that you've got protecting the sides. Now, to fit the antenna, it's fairly straightforward. You simply need to remove the two screws over this side. Now, it's quite interesting that these are actually bolts that go all the way through. It's not just a screw that goes into the VTX air unit frame. It's actually a bolt that goes through one of the mounting holes, so you can actually undo one, loosen then the second one, allow the nut to drop. You want to be careful that it doesn't drop away completely, and actually you can rotate that arm out like that, and then that reveals the UFL located down in there. That's nicely protected, and then we can simply clip that on, making sure that it's nicely in place. And then we can swing our metal shield back over the top, pop our bolt through, and then put the nuts on and tighten it up. Okay, now just to give you an idea of how this VTX looks now the casing's removed. Inside you can see we still got our big main chipset there in the middle, and then our voltage regulator next to it as well, with that bit of heat compound on top. We've then got a power diode next to our bind button and our MIPI connection over here for our camera. If I rotate the board over on the back, you will see that we have our transceiver in the bottom right with that bit of compound on. Above that, our power amplifier, and then our single antenna UFL. We have our memory chip over here and another voltage regulator over here. They've done a really nice job of optimizing the packaging on this VTX. Obviously, they've been able to save some space as a result of going down to a single antenna, but it is clear that there's been optimization overall on the design of the VTX, and it's great to see them continue to develop their designs overall. Now, it's just worth mentioning on that mounting pattern, as I've said, we've got a 20x20 in the middle and a 25x25 on the outside. The 25x25 is actually holes that go right through the VTX where the 4 bolts are fitted as standard. The 20x20 though is actually just thread inserts in the metalwork of the heatsink. There's some on this side and there's some on this side, but they don't go all the way through. You can't bolt up through the VTX. You can simply bolt into it though from your frame, mounting it directly to the plates. Now, there is obviously going to be a lot of questions around the move of the Avatar system from a dual antenna setup originally to the new single antenna setup. Now, Avatar isn't the first system to do this. DJI did it with the Vista. Originally, the air unit had 2 antennas and then the Vista had a single one. And overall, there was very little RF performance difference between the two. But it is worth me mentioning that the DJI system was artificially limited due to the range limit DJI imposed. And as a result of that limitation, we may not have always seen the limitations that a single antenna setup may have given us. Now, there are some technical terms for these setups. For instance, the dual antenna setup on the air unit with the goggles is known as MIMO, or multi-in, multi-out. That is multi-input on the transmitter side and multi-output on the receive side, which means we've got multiple antennas on both sides of the system doing the work, and then they can use various different types of modulation and diversity, such as spatial diversity or others, to be able to improve the performance. However, the term for what we're moving into is single in, multi-out, single transmitting antenna with multiple receiving antennas on the goggle side. Now, in all of the testing in Wi-Fi and WiMAX and all of the other stuff, there is a clear performance drop when you move from multi-in, multi-out down to these other systems, even as far as single in, single out on a traditional setup. Generally, multi-in, multi-out gives you additional data rates, improved penetration and range. However, it isn't clear that is the case in FPV, and just because we see those differences in those systems doesn't mean you're going to see a massive drop in performance here. In my initial testing, I am not seeing any change really in the RF performance between the original VTX and the new single antenna VTX. I haven't tested this element extensively yet. However, the initial tests do not show anything I'm particularly concerned about. And from an RF point of view in FPV, I honestly don't think this is going to make a major difference. For starters, our quad setups really were not optimal with the 2 antennas on the back. Most of the time we were using the same polarization as well, and we were largely treating them like a single antenna setup anyway. If we'd moved our antennas between the front and the back, then we may have seen a bigger benefit, but the way we had our antenna set up largely meant that it just behaved like a single antenna system most of the time. This is why actually with the DJI 3 system, they've actually done 2 different polarizations on the 2 legs with the single antenna, because what you're then doing is getting a bit of a benefit because you're doing one on one polarization and one on another, but we don't really see that on the Avatar system or what people do in the real world. Here and now, as I've already said, from my point of view, I'm not seeing any major downsides to this, but there is a possibility it will have an effect. But how many people that would affect remains to be seen. The chances are it is going to be so small, most people will see no difference at all. There is also a question with regards to the new VTX and GPS. Now, it is fairly well known that the original VTX on Avatar did cause problems with many GPS modules. It isn't that the AvatarHD system transmits lots of information on the GPS band, but what it is a little bit noisy. It generally increases the noise floor around the GPS frequencies, and there is this strange little carrier that appears down the bottom that can cause problems, and this is what's been causing the issues when people have tried to use GPS with the original VTX. What I decided to do was some tests to take a look at what the difference was, and what I'm going to do now is show you the results of the original VTX on the spectrum analyzer, and then we'll take a look at the new one. Now, just to demonstrate what happens with the V1 VTX first of all, if I power it up, what you'll see is a little bit of noise appear on the GPS band, and then you'll see a carrier appear towards the bottom, and you'll see the marker land on that carrier, and that interference from the VTX and antennas is what is increasing the noise floor and affecting the GPS. If I power it down, you'll see that that will then disappear and the band will return to normal. Next, I'm now showing you the result of powering on the new V2 VTX. Again, exactly the same situation. I'm measuring it in exactly the same way. However, you will notice that there is no change, no effect on the GPS band at all. Now, it is too early for me to say categorically they have resolved the GPS issue, but here and now on the bench and in my initial tests, things are looking much better. Next, it's time to take a look at the cameras in action. What we're going to do first of all is take a look at them in the workshop, and then we'll move outdoors. Before we do that though, I just want to say it has been almost impossible for me to get good footage with these new cameras in the weather that I've had here in the UK. Every time I have tried to fly, it has either been drizzling, raining, or just complete dark. Now, that has meant I have been able to get out with the new night camera a little bit, and we will take a look at footage on that in this bit too. But I did just want to say I am sorry there isn't some lovely, nice footage here. Everything that I've put together has been scraps from getting out, getting a little bit of flight time before it rained and getting back. What I've really struggled with is being able to get all the parts of the system in the air at the same time. I've ended up having to do it in different segments, but what I can tell you is, having spent the time I have with it, I've come to some really interesting conclusions, and I will share them with you at the end of the video. To start, we're going to take a look at the cameras in the workshop. This is the original Micro V1 camera. The footage you're seeing here comes direct from the DVR. Next, we're going to hop over to the new Micro V2. Now, the interesting thing about the V2 is that you can now record on the DVR in both 16:9 like here and in 4:3 as well. And because this is a proper 4:3 sensor, you're then able to gain that additional vertical resolution. Next, hopping over to the new Pro Starvis camera. This is that low light camera, and again, just showing you how that handles the internal lights. If we then turn the lights off in the workshop and take a look at how each of the camera performs, we have the V1, the V2, and then the new Starvis Pro camera. It's clear this is offering much better performance than the other two, but what is interesting is if you look at the difference between the V1 and the V2 micro camera, the V1 is actually better in low light. So it's time for me to try these cameras in daylight conditions. Now, I've actually got a bit of a dry day, not too windy, so hopefully this will give us a chance to take a look at how the new camera performs with regards to the micro. It'll be interesting to see it with regards to that darkness that you see on the original cameras, the change between light and low light. It was never the greatest with regards to how contrasty it was, and you'd get those dark black holes in bushes and trees. The reason I've actually come down here rather than the flying field is we still have lots of shrubbery around the sides, which means I'll be able to test that element, and then we'll move on to that polar camera, that night camera, the Pro one, to see how it performs in daylight conditions too. For the aircraft, we have the AOS 5 version 2. That's been converted with the new Polar night camera. We then have my original micro camera on that quad there with the Avatar VTX, and I also have an 03 camera with me too. I've then made up this adapter like I've done in the past. This has got that new Micro V2 on. We'll have to see how it performs on this bracket. The last time I tried doing it this way, I did get a bit of vibration in the footage. If I do, I'll end up having to swap the camera over direct rather than try it on this bracket, but I thought I would try the easier way first. Now, just before we fly, I just want to show you the difference between the 16:9 mode and this new native 4:3 mode, again outside, just to show you the difference in field of view. Now, I just want to note, you may see a little bit of jello or vibration in the footage on this V2 camera. That is nothing to do with the camera itself. It is simply as a result of the mounting I'm using on the top, as I showed a little bit earlier. So, with regards to the V1 versus the V2, there are some interesting differences. It is clear that there's slightly better low light on the V1, but you do have that native 4:3 resolution on the V2. That 4:3 is going to give you that increased vertical field of view and resolution, and you can only have the gyro sensor option on the V2. Looking between the footage in here, the V2 does seem flatter. It isn't quite as bright as the V1, but I can't say what it's like in bright daylight conditions because I simply haven't had it to test it with. Overall, I don't think there's a dramatic difference between the two, and the benefits you're getting on the V2 probably outweigh the downsides that you're losing in the sense of that little bit of low light, especially considering you now have that polar camera, which we'll take a look at in a minute. So next, it is time to take a look at this Pro Polar Starvis camera. This one is the most interesting camera of the new releases because not only does it have that larger sensor, it's got that low light capability as well. So let's take a look at this one. Next, I want to get some dusk flights in with this polar camera. Now, it's about 6 p.m. here. You can see the light level at the moment. It's not dark, but the light level is dropping. So I want to do a test flight at this point, and then hopefully if the rain holds off, we'll do another couple of flights once the level drops a bit more. Okay, so just to show you the light level now before I do one last flight, you can see that it is dropping quickly. The corn is down there, you can see him by there. I can still see the field, I can still see things around me, but what I can't see is, you know, that bushes over there now is pretty much a dark mess, as is this bush line down here. I can still see the individual trees and stuff and that stuff over there, but it's certainly now getting to the point where I would really struggle to fly on 99% of cameras. Next, I decided to pop out with the Pro camera and test it in complete darkness. Now, I didn't actually take the other Walksnail cameras with me on this one, but I did take the DJI 3 system, and what I'm going to do is show you the results of what this camera can do compared to my iPhone and O3 in complete darkness. Okay, folks, just to show you what it is like out here on my iPhone before we do the quad footage. Now, I've laid them out here and I'll start showing you what it's like. I haven't touched the ISO on this. On the phone, I've done nothing. Just to give you an idea of how it looks over there. This just gives you an idea of the light level. It's not a very nice night here at all. I'm not going to fly it, but I'm going to walk it. And the run I'm going to walk is this, which I'm walking here. So this is the same route that I will do with each of the drones. I'll walk it along here, give you an idea of how it looks. We'll look at O3 and we'll look at the new polar camera for the Avatar system, just to give you an idea of how that looks over there as well. Then I'll try and make it up this bank without slipping because it's very wet and very slippy. And then we'll walk back along here. Now, obviously, my phone is going to be adjusting for this light level automatically, and we'll do the same with the systems as well. Looking down there, Again, the drones are there. You can see the remotes on. Give you an idea of how it looks down there. And I'll try to pretty much do the same thing. Now, just to compare the new Avatar camera to DJI O3, here we have O3 in auto settings mode at 30 frames a second. If I now switch over to the new AvatarHD Pro Starvis camera, it's 60 frames a second. You can see that it is dramatically better. If we switch back to O3, what I've done now is set it to 30 frames a second, but manual ISO. This is as good as you're going to get from the O3 system, and I'm going to do the same walk that I did with my iPhone on the O3 system, and then we will do it on the Avatar system with the new camera. Now you can see here, compared to my iPhone, there's a lot less visibility. Everything is just a black mess. You can't see anything at all. I can't see the ground. Just as an observation from the actual light level that I'm seeing, it is very, very dark. This is a more true reflection of the light level that I'm seeing with my own eyes. But as you can see, the low light capabilities on O3 are not remotely as good as we're going to get on this new camera from Walksnail. Here is the same walk with the new Pro Starvis camera. Now it's set to 60 frames a second because that's the slowest frame rate the Avatar system supports. O3 obviously has the capability of going down to 30 frames a second, but this is as good as we're going to get from the AvatarHD system. You can see there is a dramatic difference in what is visible. In fact, we can see around us no problem at all. You can see even down to those hedgerows where it is completely black. I can see the ground, I can see the grass, I can see the woodwork, and it gives me plenty of visibility. I'd have no problem flying with this in these conditions at all. Now, just to compare the Avatar system on its two different frame rates, 60 versus 100. Now, obviously, 100 frames a second is going to restrict the amount of time the shutter can stay open, and as a result, you're going to have less light being able to get to the sensor, and you can see that the 100 frames a second is slightly darker than the 60, but there isn't a lot in it, and both are very flyable. And just as a reminder to show you the O3 system again, this is me walking back along the top. It is dramatically different in its low light capability. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on what we have here from Walksnail. Starting with the VTX, I think they've done a great job on taking what they did before and improving it in almost every way. The packaging is much better. We've now got the option of connection and pads, much better for connecting up the antennas. You haven't got those tiny screws anymore. It's nice to see the bind button is protected, the harness connection is protected, but you've got pads as well if you want them, and the firmware update or the USB port on the other side where you put the firmware on the VTX has been improved and hidden as well. We've also now got this increased storage option, which is going to make a lot of people happy. And obviously, we've now got this single antenna as well compared to the dual antennas before. I think what they've done here is what I would call optimization. The design is better, how it's packaged is better, and it is going to be interesting to see how it performs from an RF point of view with regards to that single antenna, but I really don't think that there's any major downsides to this new VTX, and it's great to see that they've taken on board a lot of the feedback. They've taken what they had good with the original VTX, improved it, and now we've got what a lot of people have been asking for. It's also good to see that new mounting pattern, which a lot of people have asked for, and I'm quietly confident on the GPS behavior as well. I'm not going to say 100% here and now all of those problems with the interference are fixed, but my initial tests are promising, so we need to do more testing, but it is looking good, and I will update you on that specifically in a separate video when I get the chance to finish all of the GPS testing. Now, just something else to mention on the VTX before we move on. It's nice to see that additional storage, but there are still some quirks of that onboard recording. As I've said, it is only 1080p 60, so don't think you're getting a massive bump here in resolution on the recording, because you're not. And I'm still seeing the flickering of the OSD when recording, regardless if it's the 8 gig or the 32 gig VTX. It is nice to have that recording capability on board, and it does work better today than it ever did in the past. However, there are still some quirks to this, and it is going to be something we'd like to see them improve as time goes on. Next, talking about the cameras. Now, we'll start with the Micro V2. There isn't major upgrades with regards to this camera, but it is nice to see what they've done. We've got that 4x3 sensor that people have been asking for, and we've now got the option of gyro flow, which means you can stabilize the footage from your Avatar system rather than having to use an external action camera. You're still, though, limited by the onboard DVR recording, which is 1080p 60 if you want the best possible recording quality. But it is good that you don't have to use an external camera with this system now, and if you want to be able to fly without one but still stabilize the footage, you can now do it. There is, though, the odd little downside to that new camera in my tests. It isn't quite as good in low light footage, but then again, that's a pretty minor thing to give up because it isn't a low light camera, and it is a little bit flatter, but you can always change that in post. What I'm not seeing really is any major improvements, though, in how it reacts with regards to the AGC, but I'm going to have to test that a lot more in summer as the light levels improve, and there may be some things there that I haven't been able to see yet. The real interesting camera for me, though, is not the Micro V2, it's the Pro or the Polar camera. I really like this. It looks great in the daytime. It is a 16:9 camera natively, but it has really nice image quality. It's got that large sensor, and that's what gives you that really good low light footage or that nighttime footage. I'm not saying it is perfect at night, but it is dramatically better than we've seen on anything else, and I think it's going to be the choice camera for me and probably many other people moving forward. And it really does have all of the benefits that we've wanted. We've now got that gyro sensor again, so you can use it with gyro flow, low light. So it's going to be really good to see what people do with it. And again, you still be able to record to that onboard DVR at 1080p 60. There are some quirks in the specs that the way they say them. They say 125 frames a second. It's still 100 frames a second on the system, and the DVR is still 1080p 60, but it is really good to see the improvements that that camera brings. I think Walksnail have done a great job to continue to push this system forward, and they really have been continuing to develop it. We've got the hardware now, but there are still some things missing on software. We're still waiting on the companion mode or the ability for someone to ride along, and the focus mode still isn't perfect as well. But I have to say, looking at this system through these cameras in these tests, it is looking better today than I have ever seen it before, and I think they are really beginning now to get this system dialed in, and it is a very real competitor in the market compared to any of the other systems. And whilst it doesn't quite have the image quality in bright daylight that O3 does, or the recording options from an FPV point of view, it is looking to be one of the best options on the market today, and it's certainly one of the options that works with more systems than DJI, and very close to the same as what we see from HD0. So that's it from me on this one. I hope you have found it interesting. Please do let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm really interested in your thoughts. I'm sorry it's such a long video. I was never going to be able to get all of this in a shorter video. I could have split it into two, but I decided to do it as one. Finally, I just want to say, if you want to support the channel to allow us to keep making content like this, please do consider checking out the links to my Patreon. It's only through the support of my Patreons I'm able to keep making content on this channel, and I would not be able to do it without your support. And I just want to say a massive thank you from me to all of the Patreons who do support the channel. And if you think we've earned your support today, please do consider checking it out. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.